November 20th, 1943. For a generation, the United States had envisioned a grand advance across the Central Pacific, a naval thrust towards Tokyo. But the crushing losses of Guam and the Philippines in 1941 and 1942 shattered these initial plans, forcing a desperate defensive posture in the South Pacific. Following the protracted and costly victory at Guadalcanal, the Allied initiative slowly returned. Now, the US could choose its battlegrounds. The long-held strategy to cross the Central Pacific meant confronting a reality shaped decades earlier. Post-World War I mandates had allowed Japan to construct formidable naval and air bases throughout the Marshalls and Carolines. This strategic geography, combined with the range limitations of land-based aircraft, dictated that any westward advance must begin with the Gilbert Islands, placing them within bomber range of the next objectives. Yet within the American High Command, a subtle tension existed. The U.S. Navy favored seizing undefended islands to build critical airfields, a quicker path to projecting power. The U.S. and definitely as the Sprest Marine Corps, however, sought the crucible of a defended beachhead, a direct challenge to prove the efficacy of amphibious assault doctrine. Battalion Island, a tiny wedge of coral in the Tarawa atoll, offered precisely that challenge. Its capture would not only secure a vital airfield, but would test the very foundations of America's burgeoning amphibious warfare capability. Battalion, less than 2 square miles of coral sand, was transformed by Japanese forces into an unyielding fortress. Their occupation of the Gilberts began on December 10th, 1941, and by September 1942, the main body of the 500-man Yokosuka 6th Special Naval Landing Force had arrived on Battalion, beginning a methodical, relentless fortification program. By mid-May 1943, the Sasebo 7th Special Naval Landing Force bolstered these defenses. Japanese strategic doctrine emphasized defense in depth, prolonged resistance, and inflicting maximum casualties to deter future attacks and demonstrate national resolve. They believed they could hold out long enough for the Imperial Navy's combined fleet to arrive. Their morale was extremely high, rooted in confidence in their training, their meticulously crafted defenses, and their commander, Rear Admiral Kaiichi Shibasaki. The island bristled with weaponry, 4 Vickers, 8-inch naval rifles, and 4 dual 5.5-inch anti-aircraft/anti-boat mounts were among the deadliest guns. Scores of 13mm anti-aircraft machine guns and 7.7mm Anbu Hotchkiss infantry machine guns provided interlocking bands of fire. 14 light tanks, armed with machine guns, and 37mm cannon were also on hand. Crucially, there was no approach to Battalion that was not covered by multiple anti-boat weapons. The defenses themselves were a labyrinth. Prefabricated steel pillboxes, coconut log pillboxes built into the seawall, some with overhead protection and camouflage from straw sacks. Concrete and steel positions, with 12-inch thick, reinforced concrete walls and steel gun cupolas, were set deep into the coral. Roofs of coral, sand, and logs tapered to conform to the topography, achieving remarkable concealment. Extensive protected trench systems connected emplacements, allowing defenders to move under constant cover. Tank traps radiated from the southwest tip to protect a huge concrete structure mounting the 8-inch Vickers naval rifles. American intelligence, gathered through reconnaissance by B-24s and U.S. Navy long-range aircraft, had accurately estimated the garrison size at 4,836 defenders, 2,619 of them combat troops. Detailed photographs, taken during air attacks in September 1943, were invaluable for making final landing plans. Yet, despite this intelligence, a critical miscalculation occurred. American Navy tacticians, overconfident in new naval bombardment techniques, believed naval gunfire would practically annihilate defending forces. Tarawa was, to some, perceived as more of a demonstration than a fight. This led to a dangerous underestimation of the depth and effectiveness of the Japanese fixed defenses. It also challenged the myth that air and naval bombardment alone could neutralize heavily fortified positions. The September 1943 air attacks, though inflicting minimal damage, revealed the proximity of American bombers, forcing the evacuation of Japanese aircraft and prompting the construction of a new command post and heightened alertness. The 2nd Marine Division, a veteran force but undergoing significant personnel and organizational flux post-Guadalcanal, was tasked with this crucial opening of the Central Pacific Campaign. Its commander, Major Julian Smith, a seasoned veteran but with no action in the current war, assumed command on May 1, 1943. He was joined by rising leaders like Lieutenant Cole Dave Shoup, the division's operations officer, responsible for orchestrating the battle plan. This new command structure under the newly created V Amphibious Force asserted the Navy's primary control over the Central Pacific Campaign. A critical, yet tragically unheeded, warning came from Majed Frank Holland, former resident commissioner of the Gilbert Islands, who had lived on BTO for 15 years. His emphatic, repeatedly ignored warnings about the rare and unpredictable dodging tide, a phenomenon that could render standard landing craft ineffective against BTO's extensive reef, proved prophetic. The reef itself, from 500 to 800 yards from the beach, and averaging 50 yards wide, presented a formidable natural barrier to counter anticipated tidal difficulties and the expected defenses. 50 improved LVT-2 Amtracs arrived, a significant technological innovation offering a crucial hedge. 16 Sherman M4 tanks, each mounting a 75 mm gun, were also designated as the best means for cracking the many pillboxes. On November 1, 1943, the 2nd Marine Division sailed from Wellington, New Zealand. After practice landings at Malay Bay, Efate, all hands were assembled on November 10 and told about the impending invasion. On November 13, the invasion fleet sailed. D-Day, November 20, 2020, 1943. General quarters sounded at 0215, marking the official start of operations. The Marines gathered for a pre-battle meal of steak and eggs, a traditional, yet for some, an unappetizing ritual. Young FM1 John Lane, like many, grappled with existential thoughts of what it would mean to be no longer living. At 0441, the Japanese fired the first shot. This was an immediate stark signal that shattered any illusion of a softening up phase. For 35 critical minutes, the Japanese artillery fire went unanswered, allowing defenders to re-engage. At 0507, Japanese medium and large caliber guns began firing, and the transports, caught by surprise, were forced to shift position, some moving south of their desired launching spots. It was 0542 before the USS Maryland commenced firing its main batteries. By 065, ships ceased firing to allow for airstrikes, a pause that inadvertently allowed Japanese gunners to re-engage. When naval gunfire resumed at 06S and again at 060 with the announcement of WWII, it was already clear that the initial plan was in disarray. The bombardment, while the largest of its kind ever seen up to that time, was proving woefully inadequate. Tons of shells carromed off the low dunes or exploded beyond intended targets, leaving Japanese defenses largely intact. The landing faced immediate, unexpected resistance, shattering early optimism. The expectation of an easy job, or milk run, was brutally disproven. The initial assault waves, approximately 1,500 men across 6 augmented companies, were carried by Amtracs. But the dodging tide, predicted by Maj Frank Holland, had arrived. Headwinds unexpectedly halved the speed of the landing craft. HHA was delayed multiple times, effectively extending the period of vulnerability. At ET-54, Admiral Hill ordered all ships to cease fire, providing the Japanese with crucial time to re-prepare their defenses. Then, some 700 yards from the beach, the Amtracs encountered the Tude Reef. The LVT-1s, a hybrid vehicle adapted rather than specially designed for combat, along with the improved LVT-2, became stationary targets. Their quarter-inch boilerplate armor proved useless against 13 mm bullets. Follow-on waves of Marines were forced to wade more than 500 yards through fire-swept, waist-deep water. This horrifying passage was a critical planning failure and an immediate, devastating turning point. The myth of bombardment efficacy was starkly debunked. On the pierhead, Lieutenant Sheep, Dean Hawkins and 1 Casualty Gordon Leslie stormed ashore at 0855, leading a 36-man scout and sniper platoon in a daring, brutal 5-minute fight to clear the tip of the 500-yard pier. This initial, isolated success, however, was not indicative of the broader assault. On Beach Red 1, 288 Schulte, leading his platoon, faced a killing zone. His Amtrac, LVT-124, suffered devastating hits. Of 18 Marines aboard, Only 3 were standing. To his left, the derelict steel hulk Niminawa on the reef had been repurposed as a Japanese machine gun emplacement. A relentless source of fire, the U-shaped concave arc of Red One funneled Marines between heavily manned points where targets were distinguishable from 200 yards out. The final 100 yards were often described as the worst. On Beach Red 3, Capt. William Tatum, I Company commander, was killed by a bullet to the forehead while observing his lead platoons. 2DAT John Cannon, commanding I Company's 3rd platoon, experienced intense sensory overload. His tractor, attempting to breach a log seawall, stopped in the water about 75 yards from shore. Here, PFC Jim Goldman, a Bayar man, demonstrated grim resourcefulness, salvaging parts from a dead Marine's weapon. The seawall, 4 feet high in some areas, provided meager cover. In the first 30 minutes, the 2nd Battalion, 2nd Marines, sustained more than 30% casualties. More than half of the battalion's infantry company officers were dead or wounded. Lieutenant Cole Herbami, a battalion commander, was killed at 1000 en route to the beach, a critical loss of leadership in the opening hours. The initial assault devolved into a chaotic, piecemeal struggle. Maj Jim Crow, battalion commander on Red 3, wading through fire to reach the beach, attempted to establish command. He rallied his men, even waving his shotgun, but the situation remained dire. Colonel Dave Shoup, frustrated commander, trapped in a shell crater, serving as his command post, grappled with jumbled and confusing reports. Crucially, not a single operable radio was on the beach at the outset, hindering command and control. An Amtrak carrying a vital TBX radio team was blown apart, killing all aboard. The tank assaults faced immediate catastrophe. 10 medium tanks were launched from the reef, 7 made for Red 3. 4 were disabled or set on fire shortly after landing. The Condor was disabled by a friendly dive bomber. The Charlie was lost to a Japanese anti-tank gun. Cannonball was driven into a burning fuel dump. Colorado was set on fire and driven into the surf. In little more than an hour, the number of usable tanks on central and eastern beaches was cut from 10 to 2. This highlighted the Marine Corps' inadequate doctrine for using tanks in direct infantry support. The supply situation, based on insufficient water over the reef and the expectation of a rapid victory, was in total chaos. Skimpy supplies of ammunition raised fears of exhaustion. LCDID Lou Fabian, the squadron beachmaster, found himself a waterborne traffic cop, managing the tangle of boats beyond the reef. One boat was ordered to jettison everything else but ammunition to get it to the pierhead. The early Marine Corps doctrine for tank and communication support proved woefully inadequate, leading to immense casualties. The battle was not a strategic advance but a desperate, costly struggle for a foothold, often achieved through individual bravery rather than coordinated effort. As the day wore on, small, isolated groups penetrated as many as 75 yards inland. This was a battle measured in feet, more feet, yards, and tens of yards. Friendly fire incidents where Navy F-6F Hellcat fighters, unapprised of the situation on land, aggressively strafed Marine positions, further complicated matters. Improvised signaling, like CPL Charles Rosales, using a fluorescent yellow marker panel, or 2D Gelenti Bob Harvey, stripping off white skivvy t-shirts, became crucial to halting these tragic errors. Individual acts of courage became the de facto driving force. Istesjeet Wilbur Burgess, facing cowering riflemen, issued a legendary challenge. "What's the matter? Yeah, wanna live forever." This galvanized some to move the devastating effectiveness of Japanese machine gun fire, particularly from positions like the Niminor Hulk, created near-impenetrable fire lanes. Lieutenant Joe Edward Albert Heimberger, known later as actor Eddie Albert, became a celebrated figure for his repeated heroic rescue of wounded Marines from the reef despite boat damage and direct fire. Dean Hawkins, the scout and sniper platoon leader, repeatedly led assaults on heavily defended pillboxes, suffering multiple severe wounds before ultimately dying from his injuries, earning the Medal of Honor. By late afternoon, some consolidation began. Maj Mike Ryan's Marines secured Beach Green by 12:05. On Red 3, Maj Jim Crow, faced with Japanese tanks, received a desperate call from his executive officer, Maj Bill Chamberlain, requesting strafing and urging troops forward. Sergeant John Haruska uttered the simple, brilliant solution to get 900-pound 37mm anti-tank guns over the seawall. Lift 'em over. This allowed the crucial halting of the Japanese tanks. A decisive moment passed unnoticed between 1500 and 1700. Japanese Admiral Shibasaki, his primary command post, overwhelmed by wounded, moved to a secondary bunker. This move, unobserved by American commanders, coincided with a critical tactical window when his forces might have launched a decisive counterattack on Red 3. But with Shibasaki's unknown whereabouts, and later, his death, likely from friendly fire, the opportunity for a coordinated Japanese response was lost. Their reliance on compromised or cut-wire communications left defenders compartmentalized and unable to coordinate. Dusk on D-Day brought little relief. Colonel Shoup's radio batteries were fading, his lone communicator, PFC John Gross, struggling with a small radio. His repeated urgent requests for supplies highlighted the dire situation. Divisional command, disconnected from the brutal reality on Battalion, operated with insufficient, often inaccurate, second-hand information. Brigadier General Dutch Hermel, Assistant Division Commander, experienced significant communication difficulties, impacting his career. After 2000 on D-Day, an all-night comedy of errors ensued due to faulty communications. Key decisions, such as where to land reinforcements like Hayes's battalion, were made with flawed intelligence, resulting in misdirected efforts. The divisional staff was fighting a different battle than the men on the beaches. Despite the sheer bravery of the initial landings, victory was not assured. After dawn of the second day, Major Julian Smith, faced with immense casualties, made the grim decision to reinforce rather than cut his losses. More than 100 Marines, many of them wounded, materialized from under the pier, organized into carrying parties to assist with the wounded and manage resupply. The protracted and costly nature of the Tarawa assault, particularly on the eastern sectors, stemmed from a complex interplay of underestimated Japanese defenses, initial tactical missteps, and the immense challenges of amphibious warfare against a determined enemy. It was a brutal attritional battle far exceeding initial projections. The initial bombardment had not achieved its intended purpose. The battle exposed critical flaws in pre-assault bombardment strategy and intelligence assessments. Tarawa was a pivotal, albeit tragically costly, amphibious assault. It fundamentally altered American naval strategy in the Pacific War by demonstrating the inadequacy of pre-invasion bombardments against well-defended positions. It highlighted the critical need for overwhelming naval and air superiority, meticulously planned logistical support, and highly integrated intelligence. The horrific casualties at Tarawa, vividly captured and subsequently published, starkly contrasted with earlier, more sanitized depictions of warfare. It forced a national reckoning with the true cost of the Pacific campaign. The lessons learned from the chaos and sacrifice at Tarawa spurred immediate improvements in amphibious landing craft, bombardment techniques, and intelligence gathering. These profound influences shaped subsequent island-hopping campaigns, proving the viability of seizing forward bases to bypass heavily fortified Japanese strongholds, enabling the eventual advance across the Pacific. Tarawa became a stark lesson in the brutal realities of island-hopping and the immense human cost of seizing heavily fortified positions. It was a battle where individual courage and tenacity were often met with overwhelming, well-entrenched resistance, a testament to the profound, unforeseen challenges of modern warfare. And nowhere was this brutal reality more starkly illustrated than in the terrifying, sudden nature of individual combat. For Rifleman Mike Hoffman, aboard his tractor, the future vanished in a single blinding flash, witnessed by Jim Fawcett, who, like so many, was praying for survival on the sandy shelf of the beach. Hoffman's vehicle disappeared in an immense cloud of smoke and steel splinters, a violent action that erased an entire crew. This was the devastating initial shock, the harsh truth that gains on D+1 were not quite good but immensely costly. The underestimation of Japanese defenses, their intricate trench networks, and heavily reinforced bunkers was now horrifyingly clear. Initial objectives proved far more difficult to achieve than anticipated, a direct consequence of flawed naval bombardment strategy and inadequate pre-invasion intelligence. The reef, a critical obstacle, and landing craft limitations led to exposed landings and heavy initial casualties. Command and control fractured amidst the chaos. Lieutenant Al Tidwell's platoon, a microcosm of the wider devastation, lost nearly half its men, including 15 riflemen and key leadership. The 1st Battalion 8th suffered over 100 dead or missing, and more than 200 wounded. Even Colonel David Monroe Shoup, commander of all Marine Corps troops ashore, experienced the brutal immediacy, suffering severe shock from an exploding shell and a painful leg wound. Yet, despite his injuries, Shoup rallied hesitant troops, leading assaults across the reefs, demanding smashing attacks against unbelievably strong and fanatically defended Japanese positions. His urgent message to the flag indicated the desperate need for troops and ammunition. The battlefield was a maelstrom, where individual resilience and initiative became paramount. Lieutenant Wyeth Willard, a Protestant chaplain, paraded the beach in full view of enemy fire, chanting, "I'm Chaplain Willard, and you can't shoot me," a unique testament to unwavering spirit. 2nd Lieutenant Al Tidwell was tasked with forming composite units, a stark indicator of the disarray, while Lieutenant Colonel Presley Rixey commandeered a demi-platoon for stevedore service, highlighting the desperate need for manpower. 75 Epac howitzers, crucial artillery pieces, were sitting idle at the water's edge by dawn on D+1, a critical failure in immediate deployment. The problem of resupply was a relentless challenge. On D-Day morning, Japanese mortars ignited a fuel dump, burning a critical gap in the pier. Yet, improvisation flourished. Lieutenant Commander Lou Fabian, the squadron beachmaster, wielding extraordinary powers, took charge of the chaotic pierhead operations. He countermanded superiors to send critically needed supplies, especially 75 ammunition. Together with Lieutenant Colonel Chester Salazar, they devised and implemented a roller conveyor system from pipe metal structures, efficiently moving supply crates under constant fire. The use of LVTs was redefined, operating directly between the beach and the pierhead, improving casualty evacuation and the delivery of crucial 75 gun ammunition. Coxswain Joseph Jimenez, a young junior sailor, restored order at the pierhead, taking de facto command due to a command void. Meanwhile, the battle raged for specific, heavily fortified positions. The northwestern taxiway and the main runway were major obstacles and killing grounds. An 8-inch mount and the final tank trap before a gun complex loomed as formidable bastions. Against these, the punny 37 guns on light tanks were no match for Japanese defensive engineering, often rendered virtually useless. Even large TNT charges were often insufficient for reducing opposition. It became clear that flamethrowers really finished the job against bunkers and emplacements. Private First Class Johnny Borick, a flamethrower operator, became instrumental, breaching the massive steel doors of the 3 days Special Konkyochitai headquarters bunker and dousing its interior with flaming fuel. Over 100 Japanese were killed in such assaults by flamethrower teams. By 12:05, Major Mike Ryan reported holding all of Beach Green, a key consolidation point that proved critical. This allowed the subsequent landing of the 6th Marines, a decisive lodgment ashore for the 2 days Marine Division. Though fraught with logistical nightmares, the leading elements of the 1st Battalion, 6th Marines, arrived at the reef off Beach Green by 1845. As dusk fell on D+1, confidence shifted from doubt about holding gains to a clear belief in victory. The tide was turning, but the fight was far from over. Day 2 saw relentless efforts to root out deeply entrenched defenses. Major Jim Crow ordered his command to advance eastward along the northern shore, clearing trenches and pillboxes. Corporal Harry Niehoff, a demolitions expert, discovered a cache of TNT, assisting in its delivery, and playing a vital role in breaching bombproofs. By late afternoon, Marine units in the Triangle had advanced to the junction of the northeast taxiway and the main runway. The 1st Battalion, 6th, under Major Willie Jones, killed 200 Japanese that afternoon, bringing their daily total to 450. Yet, the human cost was immense. 13 of the first 21 men to reach the top of a bombproof were dead or wounded. Nearly 100 Japanese committed suicide, a grim testament to their desperate situation. Major General Julian Smith visited the front lines by 11:55 on D+2, conferring with commanders, symbolizing the assumption of command ashore, though noting that complete occupation will take at least 5 days more. The psychological toll was evident in the exhaustion of the Marines, who encountered uncountable bodies, Americans all, on the beach. The early morning of D+3, November 23, 1943, brought a ferocious counterattack. Approximately 300 Rigosentai launched a massive banzai attack on B Company's line and A Company's left front, a desperate victory cry meaning 10,000 years, but manifesting as suicidal mass assaults. The fighting involved hand-to-hand combat with bayonets. Private First Class Jack Stambor showed heroic bayonet fighting, but ultimately fell. A profound sacrifice. Naval gunfire from destroyers like the Sigsbee and Schroeder, guided by shore-fire control parties like Lieutenant, Junior Grade, Charles Corbin's, pounded Japanese positions, with the first salvo at 2,000 landing 50 yards in front of Marine lines. Between 1,300 and 1,675 rounds were expended by the 1st Battalion, 10th. Meanwhile, aboard the transport ship Doyen, Lieutenant Commander James Oliver's 5-man surgical team faced an unprecedented onslaught of wounded Marines. Albert Kelly, the junior medical officer, had insisted on tripling the ship's medical supply. They installed extra operating tables, working 15 to 30-minute snatches of sleep and food, coping with stress by sometimes howling, "London Bridge is falling down." The Doyen took aboard an unprecedented 550 wounded, functioning as a hospital ship, its staff often brutalized by the sheer volume of trauma. The final advance down the eastern tip of Betio by the 3rd Battalion, 6th, was systematic and relentless. 2 medium tanks, Colorado and Cecilia, and 7 light tanks accompanied the assault. Flamethrower teams spouted burning fuel into ventilators and firing apertures of the final bomb-proof complex. The tank Colorado fired at point-blank range into an exit channel, spreading the visceras of at least 50 Japanese, a horrifying final act of destruction. Warships and the entire 2 days Battalion 10th were positioned to prevent a mass exit. The 3rd Battalion 6th advanced 2,000 yards, at a cost of 9 dead and 25 wounded, killing 475 Japanese and capturing only 14 in 10th. At 13:05, a Marine radioman broadcast the momentous message: "Betio has fallen." The tactical victory was secured, but at an immense human cost. Staff Sergeant William J. Bordelon, making demolition charges and putting pillboxes out of action, was killed, one of countless heroes. First Lieutenant William Dean Hawkins, of the Scout Sniper Platoon, who personally destroyed multiple pillboxes after being severely wounded, died from his injuries. These were the men whose individual bravery and tenacity were often met with overwhelming, well-entrenched resistance, a testament to the profound, unforeseen challenges of modern warfare. Tarawa became a watershed moment, a harsh lesson in amphibious assault tactics, revealing critical flaws in pre-invasion planning and over-reliance on naval bombardment. It irrevocably debunked any myth of a swift, decisive victory through overwhelming force alone. The sheer destructive capability of Japanese weaponry, as witnessed by Jim Fawcett and the fanatical defense, meant success was born from critical logistical improvisation, the effective redeployment of resources, and the extraordinary sacrifices of junior officers and enlisted men, transforming a potential disaster into a hard-won, bloody victory.